Usually in a year, we'd get around 390, 400 Chinese aircraft in the area annually. Now we're up to, I think the actual number right now is about 2,500. So a huge increase, and it just kind of puts the wear and tear on Taiwanese forces.
Foreign Secretary David Lammy is off to China. The UK, like all Western countries, carefully calibrates its relationship with Beijing. On the one hand, there's the crushing of dissent and the attempts to manipulate other countries and spread Chinese influence around the world. On the other hand, there's the £86.5 billion in trade we do with the Chinese. There's also the case of Taiwan, a self-governing island the UK and most countries don't recognise as a state, and China says should be united with the mainland. China has just carried out military exercises there again. Jaime Ocon is defence editor at Taiwan Plus, and we can speak to him now. Jaime, good morning.
Good morning. How are you doing?
Very good, thank you. So there's these military exercises. Why are China doing them? Are they sending a message, and what message are they trying to send?
Well, everyone was expecting that there was going to be some sort of reaction from Taiwan's president Lai Ching-te's National Day speech. Lai Ching-te isn't very much liked by China. He's kind of labeled as a separatist because they think that he's pushing for independence. But basically, China doesn't like when Taiwan has any say in the international community. So they were conducting these exercises to kind of show that Taiwan isn't a country and kind of putting that military aggression that we've seen in the past couple of years.
Does Taiwan respond to it? Do they just the Taiwanese military do anything when China is doing this stuff?
So these exercises, it's important to know. So this exercise that China just carried out was called Joint Sword B. There was an exercise that China carried out called Joint Sword A when Lai Ching-te, Taiwan's president, first came into office in May. These exercises that just happened were one of the largest that China conducted. I think it was 153 military aircraft around. Usually when this happens, Taiwan deploys anti-ship, anti-air missile defense systems. They scramble fighter jets. But because the defense budgets are so, they differ a lot. I mean, China has an enormous budget. Think about 11 or 12 times more than Taiwan. This whole kind of exercise is twofold. It's one, for China to practice what it would do in the case of an attack on Taiwan, but then also to put pressure on Taiwan and kind of waste that defense budget.
Because ultimately, if they keep having to send up their systems or their fighter jets, they'll eventually run out of money.
Yeah, and I mean, we've seen a very clear kind of pattern of this. When the Ministry of Defense first started reporting these numbers back in, I think, 2020, usually in a year, we'd get around 390, 400 Chinese aircraft in the area annually. Now we're up to, I think the actual number right now is about 2,500. So a huge increase, and it just kind of puts the wear and tear on Taiwanese forces.
And is there a fear of an accidental conflict, that if you do have these things happening, if you have planes buzzing around the airspace, you have people being scrambled, I guess it's not impossible and to be feared that someone could accidentally engage in a way they're not supposed to, and all hell would break loose?
Well, I think an easy comparison is kind of seeing what's happening in the South China Sea. I mean, Chinese Coast Guard ships are always clashing with Philippine vessels there. And there is a concern, at least I have that concern, that, one of these exercises could turn into an accidental maybe bumping of planes or maybe miscommunication because both Taiwan and China don't talk to each other. So there is always that concern, but I think both militaries don't want a conflict to happen. I hope that's the case.
Yeah. And what's the end game here? Because it seems that one version of the narrative is that ultimately China are going to try and take Taiwan, or in their view, return it to full Chinese control. And the West is very ambivalent, deliberately ambivalent about Taiwan's status. Is there an inevitability about China's actions here, or is it still all to play for, really?
I mean, that's the million-dollar question. I mean, U.S. intelligence officials say that 2027 could be a year where China has the ability to conduct an operation. Not saying that they will, but it all goes back to kind of Taiwan's push for this sort of asymmetric strategy or porcupine strategy. It's basically kind of, trying to see how much can Taiwan invest in to make it as difficult as possible that Xi Jinping, China's president, just wakes up and says, that's way too difficult to do. We're not going to do it. There is concern now that maybe a blockade is more likely. Both U.S. and Taiwanese officials have talked about the likelihood of that. And that would even complicate matters even further, because what do you do? Because it's not necessarily an act of war unless it's actually enforced. So there's so many questions, and this is why they always call this sort of gray zone warfare.
Because also, if you make a brief comparison to Ukraine, the West can go quite a long way with combating Putin, in terms of supporting Ukraine, finding ways of giving him military equipment. I suspect the relationship between the West and Taiwan versus China isn't as straightforward as that. And even that is pretty ambiguous. I mean, even that, Ukrainians would say the West doesn't go as far as it should do. Presumably, it's far more ambiguous when it comes to the West's relationship with Taiwan.
Absolutely. I mean, the U.S. and Taiwan don't have official relationships, but under law, the United States does give Taiwan a majority of weapons. I think the biggest thing for anyone to kind of understand the differences between Ukraine and Taiwan is geography. I mean, the border that Russia and Ukraine share, that doesn't exist with Taiwan and China. And that's, I think, one of the biggest obstacles in kind of debating when or if it would happen, an attack on Taiwan, because China would have to cross the Taiwan Strait, about 100 kilometers of open sea, some of the roughest seas in the world. And so just geography, the politics, all of these are different factors that go into what's going to happen between the two sides.
Yeah, it's really interesting stuff. Jaime, thank you so much for joining us today.
2车经号3度5航道。